Hey everyone, I wanted to thank you all again for coming today. And Patty, we're sorry you couldn't make it, but we're eager to hear from you next week. Um, I wanted to just share a few slides with you about next week since we ran a little bit out of time. So, this is called The Heroine's Journey, and this week is about preparing for the journey. So this isn't a model or anything that we're following, but it's an example. And it's kind of one that speaks to my heart in the last few years about, in this case, reintegrating the feminine parts of ourselves. And we'll speak about, what the journey means. Of course, we're always journeying in life. But there are these, I think, times in life wherever we find ourselves in the life course due to certain events or just different phases of the life course itself where we experience different challenges to our self-identity. And the good news is we can always reinvigorate and re-narrate ourselves. We are very adaptable and flexible that way. And again, it's nice to do that with the support of others. So here's an example of the heroine's journey. This is the checklist for this week. So this is what hopefully you've done. And again, this is just guidance. It's not, homework. So what I'll emphasize in these, in the checklists are kind of the suggestions. But really, if you just do a few of them, a couple of practices each week, you'll be fine. So just sort of follow your intuition and go with whatever your life and your heart feels space for. So hopefully by now you've gotten a sense of the course. You familiarize yourself with the video. So you saw, have a sense why I'm focusing on compassion as this gateway catalyst to help us broaden our window of tolerance so that when we get inevitably triggered, we will move into compassion and keep our center and respond with wisdom. This is our aspiration. So have a sense of also understanding and honoring the agreements of participating in circle. We spoke about having I statements. We'll start with that check-in every week, and you'll get more used to this, but try to speak from that I standpoint. So, we're all going to kind of veer and go off in different directions, but if you find yourself kind of really going into another thread, I might pull you back gently to, what's connecting us and circle at that in that conversation. And then you've read through the ritual document and explored some of those suggestions about how to create an intentional life. So much of why we're doing this, especially now in these conditions, is to, mark space and time in a way where we can replenish ourselves so that we can be more connected to those around us and celebrate all of those sunsets that Leslie was talking about and sunrises, all those little moments, that cup of tea in the morning, and creating that home space where you might create a little altar, and we shared some of our objects. I want to speak a little bit more about that here. Here's my home space. The object that I shared with you was my uncle's bell. And I mentioned that both he and my sister struggled for many years with their diagnosis of mental illness. And really growing up, especially after my mother died and I became my sister's caretaker, this was incredibly challenging to be so close and feel like I was the protector for someone who was not quite of this world in many ways. Highly intelligent, very creative, but didn't really have the sense of coherence that so many of us take for granted. My uncle actually passed away, and lived in a time where the programs and the drugs were so much, where there was very little. And that had a huge impact on me, not because I knew about it. I had no idea, actually, but kids are very open to people who are different, I think, sometimes, and just knew him as my uncle and accepted some of his eccentricities. But because of the time and him being, he signed up voters, he helped register voters in the South. He protested Vietnam. He was in coffee houses in San Francisco and reading poetry, and could build almost anything. A mechanical genius. He could walk into a junkyard and build himself a motorcycle, or take apart a television and tell me how it worked. But living in this world, which can be heartbreaking sometimes, was not something he was able to do. And he would refuse to be on Thorazine, which was a very difficult drug. It made you feel quite drugged. So my sister, thankfully, has a whole different experience with these amazing programs in Santa Rosa. She's been able to navigate the fires that have happened in there. She's been, pulled out of her apartment in the middle of the night twice in the last couple of years, and put into a group, a very stressful thing, right? Into a group situation with her dog, where you're on a cot, in some community space, and been okay, been actually giving others comfort. She's incredibly grounded. So maybe you'll even get to meet her at some point in this course. We'll see. I've invited her to join, and I know she's looking at some of the content. But both of these people are huge teachers for me. In many ways, again, as I shared, they have this experience that I had close to them has helped me, really created my interest in the healing arts and ritual in particular through anthropology. This is my home space. We shared our objects. This is just an example of some other objects, but I really appreciate you sharing your hearts and those spaces that you carved out in your home worlds these days. And it helps just because when we do rituals, we want them to be repetitive. We want to create a sense of discipline and comfort around that, where we can, eventually this repetition becomes a positive habit in our lives. And this is just another reminder about some of the tenets of circle, to really practice deep listening, appreciative inquiry. And it's a gift to be able to speak without interruption, right? To tell our own story. So, we're giving each other this gift every time we enter circle. To speak and listen in a mindful, heartfelt way, and experience our interconnection. Again, all of this this program is to help you open up, so that when you experience any stress and a sense of, the confrontation with la enormidad, this enormity out there of suffering that is part of life. It's beautiful, but it's also heartbreaking. It's sort of the human condition, that we don't go into overwhelm, panic, rumination, or this opposite sense of avoidance or numbness. There's a practice called Tonglen that Pema Chodron teaches, and it actually is about inviting in, not breathing in some of the pain and the suffering and then exhaling it out. But for a moment, you hold it. If you have built the container properly and you're prepared, you don't have to take it in, but you also don't ignore or hide away from it. And then you're open to all of your relationships and the beauty out there. And so part of this necessitates, again, as I said, nothing to be afraid of, but confronting or integrating actually our shadow. I do believe very strongly that what's happening in our country, what's happening and it could be privately, in our relationships, it is as a result of amplification, which is what psychologists call the repression of, experiences, trauma, emotions that we just never quite are able to integrate, not necessarily solve or resolve, but even integrate them, acknowledge them and bring them into the light. I'm not a fan or a proponent of what, was big in 60s New Age circles, in some circles, which is this kind of catharsis therapy where you can, just feel every feeling and express every emotion. It's not quite that. I mean, it's fine to feel emotions, but I don't think that necessarily does anything. And they've actually shown with trauma that it can actually be re-traumatizing in some cases. So it's different. Some preparation is needed, and I'm not here to, again, invite anyone to relive or experience any trauma, but just to hold a container to begin to acknowledge, some of our shadow and bring what we feel safe to bring back into the light. So for this week is going to be a bit of preparing for the journey. And so to do that, we'll want a sense of what we're bringing, what we're packing. And so the way I've thought about this is, what are your strengths and your values? This is what will carry you through some of the more difficult parts of the journey. So there's some assessments here. The first one is just a way of looking at how you spend your time. And obviously now it's going to be a little different. But, you probably have a sense of your patterns. So there's some tools in there. You don't have to fill them all out, but maybe pick one or two. I suggest the life balance sheet and this wheel of life, and you'll get a sense of where you're spending your time and where you want to spend your time. What maybe needs shifting. You'd be surprised how you're not aware of how, there's actually more space in some places that you thought, and maybe some things just need to be shifted. So then there's optional time tracking sheets if you're somebody who likes to do that. I am not, so you'll know. And then there's an assessment to identify and a quiz to identify your strengths and values. So you can see that in the packet. And we use the VIA. We're going to use that assessment quiz. So it's pretty useful, I think. It'll give you a sense of what your strengths are, and there's actually in the next week some practices connected to each strength. So we'll do that. Optional, if you are interested in social justice and you're not quite sure what your role is these days, I kind of like this quiz called What Kind of Change Maker Are You? Are you a networker? Are you someone who wants to be more in the backstage of things? We all have a certain personality, and we don't want to fight it. We want to kind of move into somewhere there where we feel at ease, and we can we can contribute. And then, as I mentioned at the end of today's call, identify 3 wise guides who embody the qualities you wish to cultivate, and maybe consider placing their images on your home altar. And finally, we'll always have a body practice. So this week I included a recording of a body scan. So please make yourself comfortable, lay down, and do the body scan. And again, just maybe you'll want to jot down anything that you noticed during that scan. These are the pictures of my wise guides, just to give you an example. Again, these people can be living, known, unknown, non-living. I chose Vandana Shiva and Jane Goodall because they're just, women who rock in my world. I first saw Jane Goodall speak with my dad when I was in college, because before I entered anthropology, I wanted to be Diane Fossey, and I wanted to go into the jungle with the gorillas and the chimpanzees, and it was really a beautiful talk. And so I've been following her ever since. I think some of you know I worked with Coco briefly when I was in high school, the gorilla who speaks sign language. So I'm, just always been really drawn, in particular, just to see Jane Goodall blossom and get, as she grows older. In my midlife, I'm also truly drawn to women who just sort of keep their integrity. Vandana Shiva is amazing. She's an Indian physicist and created the seed bank, right? So there were all of these farmers who were committing suicide because, corporations were, having them stealing the seed basically and having them have to buy their own seed, and they couldn't afford it. And she is one of the people who argue there are things that are beyond ownership. There is a higher law. And this is the water, right? This is the seed. These are, and she's been very political about it and very eloquent. And then Tamara is the woman below. This is her husband. This is her. She sent me her wedding picture. I have a tape recorded interview with her, and it was just one of the most. I think I was just so moved during the interview, and it was so natural for her to speak about the things she did. Whether it was working in the ER in Haiti, meeting her husband, who was helping children after the earthquake, and then coming here and currently working in the Detroit area. They now have a little baby together, but she spoke to me most recently, that was a few months ago now, about just encountering African American people in Detroit who were women who would in their sickness grab her hand and just look at her eyes and say, "It is so wonderful to see a woman like you as a doctor," and that wasn't something as a Caribbean woman. It's a different racial experience. It's not to say there are, of course, a lot of class and race hierarchies, but it was different than the U.S. And she said it was so moving for her. So in these times, she is another wise guide for me. So with that, I will also, here, I'll just show you. I didn't get to show you my object, but my uncle would always bring me little gifts, and they were always unusual. I've got a whole drawer full of them. And he would find them in little shops, thrift stores, antique places, junkyards. He'd make them. And then he also made quite a few of them. And I later found out it was when he was institutionalized. They'd have like art and craft time. And so I have sort of a collection of his work from those little stained glass window hangings and such. So, my uncle committed suicide, and my sister is doing quite well. And a lot of that has to do with environmental conditions and advocates, and the fact that we are now able to talk about mental illness. It's not easy for many people, but it's so important to name these things and to bring them into the light, and to, individually, as groups and as communities. So I appreciate you, again, trusting me to just kind of explore together over the next few weeks. As I said, we'll be learning things about each other. Some of you didn't know that about me, that are quite personal, and the vulnerability we share is a gift, and we need to honor it, and I know we will. So thanks again for coming today. Next week we will look forward to hearing what Patty's object is, and introducing and bringing her into our circle. And we'll start again with our check-in. And Patty, the check-in is just a moment where we'll start off with a bit of silence just so we can kind of register how we're doing. It takes a few minutes sometimes. And then we'll create the circle by just saying what we're bringing to the group that day, kind of what our energy's like, any experiences that are still rattling around in our brain that we might want to just process really quickly. We don't want to do it a whole big story, but we'll just kind of say, I'm distracted by a recent encounter I had with a neighbor or something like that. And then we'll kind of get a sense of the temperature of the room, and we'll know. It's really important to do that because now we know how to interact with each other. Now I know to be a little more tender with one person, or celebrate something in another person. It's kind of a nice practice to do just in general, and it can get to feel more natural. Okay. So with that, I will see you on Wednesday, and look forward to, seeing who your wise guides are, learning more about them, and understanding. And I'm going to do this along with you. What my strengths are, redefining my values. Just in closing, I wanted to say I just got a call from Norma. Some of you have seen Norma in yoga, and she's a dear friend of mine. She was my mentor through anthropology, through my PhD. She wasn't actually my chair, but she was more there for me than my chair, who was a great guy too, but just wasn't around a whole lot. And she is married to a man from Iran, and has, does a lot of her work there as a social scientist and gender studies professor. She just sent me her take on what's going on in Chicago right now, and her and Kaveh, her husband, who was a journalist and also a professor, just went and were peacefully protesting with folks. So if you're interested, let me know and I'll send it to you. I asked her permission to share it with our group, but it's kind of an on-the-ground, ultimately uplifting, and I love Norma's, she's always very, very perceptive account of what's going on. I know we were speaking about it today, so it might be of interest. Okay, so that's yoga. And if you could let me know what yoga classes you think you're going to want to attend, it's not, you can just drop in. But I did want to, things are shifting a bit. I'm being asked to go do yoga at the studios again. And I'm saying no for the moment. I don't feel quite comfortable doing that yet, but I do feel comfortable doing a small class outside where we have room to be apart from each other. And I'm thinking maybe we can do Sundays in Dewey Canyon Park if people are interested. So, and then when it's bad weather, we can just go online. So if Sunday's the time that you're interested in and you'd want to meet in Dewey Canyon Park, I could go on the deck and teach you in the grass, in the shade. Let me know. Otherwise, there's still Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday mornings for the time being, okay? And I'll let you know about the meditation next time. All right. Take good care. Bye-bye.